we often like to talk about truth, and we like to talk about truth with a big T. And I would like to point out that, and I'm all good with that, but I would also like to talk about truth with a small t, just being factually accurate. At the end of the day, my biggest frustration has always been that I have always been able to win on the facts. What I'd like to do is take you through a little tour. Now, the people who see me brief, when I tell you I could start now and go 18 hours straight without stopping, there are people here who can let you know I can go 18 hours straight. The deeper we go, the deeper I can take it, and you can't get past it. Okay? So when I give a very quick snapshot in Islamic law, it'll be for the simple purpose of setting up the points to be made. Fair enough? Okay. So here's a couple questions, a couple scene setters I'd like to point out. I'm not asking anybody to believe what I say. My biggest frustration is a whole lot of decisions are based on what people choose to believe or not to believe. Rather, I'm pointing out that what I'm saying can be reduced to a series of issues of fact that can be resolved by a factual analysis. In talking about the requirement of a factual analysis, what I'd like to just basically say is all professional analysis is supposed to be fact-driven. Is that not true? So, what is clear is, even if you can show that what I'm about to prove or what I'm about to brief about the elements of Islamic law are untrue, I can still prove to you that I'm exactly wrong in exactly the way the terrorists are wrong when they are killing Americans. And that's okay with me, because my job as an intelligence analyst was never to know true Islam. It was to define the doctrine the enemy fights in furtherance of. And if I did that, I was good. If we do that, we're good. Now, if Islam is wrong, the Islamic law they quote is wrong, all that does is change the course of action we adopt, doesn't it? If he's right, it's a different course of action. But whatever it is they say they fight is why they fight. So how about a return to factual analysis? And by the way, when we do this is not hard anymore. To develop a threat doctrine, for us, all we ever had to do was look at books like this. And I'd like to point out that these books are all on Amazon. If you look at the Hidayah, right here, the Hidayah, I guess I can't walk away from that, can I? The Hidayah has, in book 2, has book 13, all 60 pages on jihad. One of these books, the CR, Shaybani CR, is the original book of Islamic law of warfare. That was published in 1955 in English. So what I'm trying to get here is, all you ever had to do was start using Amazon to get the books that define what Islamic laws say jihad is. And all I ask is that once you've validated the authenticity of those books as recognized Islamic law in the Islamic community, that should be the start point on which we assess whether or not terrorists have taken Islam out of context. Does that sound fair? I will argue, had we done that in 2001, we would have been gone in 2003. The object of the enemy in the war on terror is to keep you from ever taking a direct look at undisputed Islamic law. So, our doctrine requires that we orient on the enemy stated threat doctrine. In this war, we actually have a self-identified enemy who actually has told us what his threat doctrine is. Can one be both politically correct and threat-focused in this war? So, a couple questions. When national security leaders, decision makers, and analysts say that political correctness gets in the way of their doing their job, aren't they admitting that they put conformance to the postmodern narrative ahead of their oaths to protect and defend the Constitution against all enemies? And I mean enemies, not violent extremists. I don't even know what that means. Similarly, when statements are made like, we in the West have a tradition of not looking to religion, is that also not an admission that they conform to the postmodern narrative by not orienting on the self-identified enemy, self-identified doctrine, and then branded it a virtue? Think about that. So, here's what I want to do. If there's just one concept of Islamic law that I'd like to hit today, and it's the only, there's actually going to be two, but this is the only one I'll build out a little bit, it's this concept of abrogation. And I'm going to give you a top-level understanding to it, because it's the, I think it's, if there's one thing to know, this is it. And I'll quote right out of Islamic law. The law was laid down in the period of the Prophet, gradually and in stages. The aim was to bring society steeped in morality to observe the highest standards of morality. This could not be done abruptly. It was done in stages, and doing so necessitated repeal and abrogation of certain laws. Now, does that not completely change your understanding of the war on terror? No? Well, who brought the law to Muhammad over a period of years? Allah, over 22 years. And what this statement of Islamic law is saying is that when it was brought to Muhammad, it was done gradually and in stages. And later, when Allah revealed something that contradicted something said earlier, it abrogated what was said earlier. Makes sense? But that would mean that when we say those radicals are cherry-picking from the chronological back of the Quran, if this statement of Islamic law is true, then that would be true, wouldn't it? You ought to be cherry-picking. So, why abrogation today? Because I will argue that you cannot understand Al-Qaeda, the Muslim Brotherhood, Hizb al-Tahrir, if you don't understand this concept. Let's take a look at the milestones from Sayyid Qutb. He's a seminal thinker in the Muslim Brotherhood. He died in 1966. He said, the Quran did not come down all at once. Rather, it came down according to the needs of the Islamic society and facing new problems. Doesn't that look pretty close to what the Islamic law book says? So, he then quotes the Quran, and we'll get to it later at 17:106. But now, what happened with Sayyid Qutb? Muslim Brotherhood in the 60s was very, very, very concerned about the fact that they thought that Islam had sunken into a state of disbelief, Jahiliyyah. And the question was, how do we bring Islam back to its prior greatness? How do we do that? And he concluded that the best way to do that was to emulate how Islam was brought to the first generation, the best generation. So the whole idea for the Muslim Brotherhood was to bring Islam back to today's Muslim community and then to the world in the same way over a period of 20 years of revelation or however long it takes. And then when they hit a milestone, when they looked at the community today and saw they reached a point and it matched a point in the first revelation where they hit a milestones, then they would change the message and they would go back to this whole concept of going to a new stage, because it's revealed gradually in stages. So milestones is about marking the stages. Sound good? Now, you don't have to take my word for it that this concept, I will say, you cannot understand radical Islam if you don't understand Sayyid Qutb's milestones, and you can't understand milestones if you don't understand abrogation. Don't take my word for it. Here's Ayman Zawahiri. What does he say in his book? Sayyid Qutb's call for loyalty to God's oneness and to the knowledge of God's sole authority and sovereignty was the spark that ignited the Islamic revolution. It's good enough for me. So, here's what the Quran says in 17:106. It is a Quran which we have divided in parts from time to time in order that thou mightest recite its men at intervals. We have revealed it in stages. And the commentator to the Quran says this is progressive revelation. What Major Hassan said in his brief that he gave to his fellow students in Bethesda was that the reason he's asking is because when the Quran was revealed, there's progressive revelation, and it has to do with abrogation. You see that slide? Does everybody see that? Okay. So, the Quran went on to say, my brief went, when we substitute one revelation for another, and Allah knows best what He reveals in stages, they say thou art but a forger. And of course, the commentator again said this is the Islamic concept of progressive revelation. And a final quote, none of our revelations do we abrogate or cause to be forgotten, but we substitute something similar or better. Knowest thou not that Allah hath power over all things? And what did Major Hassan say in his brief? None of our revelations do we abrogate or cause to be forgotten when we substitute one revelation for another. I like to think that I got it right in the Pentagon. So, the literal meaning is the nask, or the cancelling or transferring in its technical sense. It is used to mean the lifting of a legal rule through a legal evidence. The abrogating text is called the nasikh, while the repealed is called the mansukh. And what did Hassan say? In Mecca, Muslims were not permitted to defend themselves. Emigration to Medina and self-defense was allowed. Then offensive fighting was allowed. Later verses abrogated formerly peaceful verses. So how many people think understanding abrogation is maybe a key to understanding the whole radical narrative? In fact, it's the key without which you can't go anywhere. How many people do you think understand this concept when they analyze the enemy in the war on terror? So, let's just give one quick example. This is Islamic law, quoting the Tafsir Ibn Kathir, and here's how it works. It's a quote from the Quran, Surah 262, verse 262. Surely those who believe, those are the Jewry, the Christians, and the Sabians. Whoever has faith in Allah on the last day and works righteousness, their wage awaits them with their Lord, and no fear shall be upon them, and neither shall they sorrow. Well, Ibn Kathir wanted to explain that. As you can see in the Islamic law book, it's called the abrogation of previously revealed religions. And what does it say? It says, The faith of the Jews is that whoever adhered to the Torah and the Sunnah of Moses, a Muslim prophet, until the coming of Jesus, a Muslim prophet. When Jesus came, whoever held fast to the Torah and Sunnah of Moses without giving them up and following Jesus was lost. The faith of the Christians was that whoever adhered to the evangel and precepts of Jesus, their faith was valid and acceptable until the coming of Muhammad. Those of them who did not then follow Muhammad and give up the Sunnah of Jesus and the evangel were lost. Why? Well, because Surah 2 was abrogated when Allah revealed in verse 385, whoever seeks a religion other than Islam will never have it accepted of him. This is divinely revealed. So that would mean, according to abrogation, that the peaceful verse, we can all get along verse, was abrogated. Fair? We could certainly quote Islamic law to show that. So if I'm wrong about the Islamic law the radicals fight for, I'm wrong because I'm reading the exact books they're reading when they walked away with an erroneous understanding of this. So, here, why is that important? Because what Hassan wanted to point out to people is two different paths to heaven. 262 was abrogated by 385. So, this is what the Quran looks like when you arrange it chronologically. I'll say in due diligence, because people say, Steve, I don't agree that's the order. I think Robert Spencer would argue that Surah 9 is the last. Other people will argue that 110 is the last. What you need to know is that everything said here will overrule everything said here in the Quran. Fair enough? And everything said up here can be, everything said down here controls whatever said up here. And there's complete agreement. You correct me if I'm wrong. Can everybody hear me? Oh. That, while some people think that 9 was the last verse, and some people think 110 is the last verse, there's pretty much universal agreement that 2 is the beginning of the Medina period, 3 came after 2, and 9 is the last to talk about jihad, and 5 is the last to talk about relations with non-Muslims. So it really doesn't matter whose ordering you take. This is pretty much settled. Isn't it?
Absolutely.
Okay, according to Islamic texts. So, we have, whoever seeks a religion other than Islam will never have it accepted of him. Well, because that's true, the last verse to talk about jihad says, fight and slay the unbelievers wherever you find them and lie in wait for them in every stratagem of war. And then it goes, that's Surah 9, verse 5. And then you have, fight those who do not believe in Allah, nor the last day, nor hold that forbidden which hath been by Allah and his apostle, nor acknowledge the religion of truth until, even if they are people of the book, that's Christians and Jews, until they pay the jizya with willing submission and feel themselves subdued. So why is that important? Because Hassan said, this is what we're supposed to do. There's the sword verse right there. And what else did he say? He quoted the Prophet Muhammad, quoting the second most authoritative hadith scholar, where Muhammad, when someone asked him, said, hey, because Allah said we must fight them until they testify, I have to tell you that I have been commanded to fight them until they testify. And if Muhammad, the most perfect Muslim, was commanded to fight them until they testify, you can easily extrapolate, without having me to go into it, that Islam has been commanded to fight them till they testify. I will submit to you that there is no factual legal analysis of Islamic law that can get you to any other conclusion, which is why there's a huge effort to keep you from ever reading Islamic law straight. What else did he say? He quoted the offensive jihad continued. I really do like to think I got this right. Warning was provided in my briefs about exactly the threat that would come from somebody who wanted to become a jihadi, on the doctrinal driver that jihadis like Major Hassan will orient on as the basis to act. Do you think it's fair to say that it's nailed? Okay. So his conclusions. God expects full loyalty and promises of heaven. Muslims may be seen as moderate, but God is not. And then you have in quotes because it's not an approved thing. I love the Quran and being a Muslim, but I don't want to live under Islamic rule. Because he went on and says, fighting to establish an Islamic state to please God, even if by force is condoned by Islam. Muslim soldiers should not serve in any capacity that renders them at risk to hurting or killing believers unjustly. And of course, he quoted the Quran. This is what people were saying. He took Islam out of context.
Tell me who Hassan is. Maybe not everybody.
Everybody know who I'm talking about with Major Hassan? Okay.
Okay, just want to make sure.
The Fort Hood killer. I am sorry. I should have said that. And these are the slides that you could get right on the web for what he was briefing. So do you see this? And do not kill anyone whose killing Allah has forbidden. So when he said that, you tell me where he I mean, you could come, I'm not saying it closes the book on it, but it's not exactly like that's not in the Quran. And it's not exactly like that doesn't say exactly what it says. I kind of think his whole argument patterns exactly. I was asked, did he ever see my brief? I've never met the guy. How could he do exactly what you're doing? Because this is undisputed Islamic law. And let me, full disclosure, Sunni Islamic law. So, what did he recommend? As opposed to Shiite. His recommendation, does this sound like a threat? Department of Defense should allow Muslim soldiers the option of being released as conscientious objectors to increase troop morale and decrease adverse events. Now, some of you might not agree, you could take it either way. But, it's one of those, it's all about what the word is. You see, he has about decreasing adverse events, that last sentence? Well, to understand what he means, you would go to the slide he titled Adverse Events, and he said adverse events was killing other soldiers. I truly believe that this briefing was him announcing that he's a jihadi to the people there, with the full knowledge that because nobody's ever researched the topic, he could look someone right in the face and say, I'm a declared jihadi, because he has to declare to become a shaheed if he dies, right? Okay? And know that nobody will understand what